Hey, I'm back. Remember in the last video when I talked about making an anniversary video to my very first video, the 3 things that ruined Ben 10 Alien Force's first 2 seasons? Well, this is that video. The reason I'm making this video is because I felt my first video didn't quite cut it. See, while I'm happy with the way it turned out, I feel like some of my complaints were a little too fanboy-y, if that makes sense. Most of that first video is just me complaining that Alien Force isn't at all like the classic show, and about all the retcons that it did towards the original series. Now, while I think all those complaints are still valid in their own right, I also don't think that's the best way to approach criticizing a show. So this time what I did is I watched the first 2 seasons of Alien Force without having seen the classic show first, so I could better judge Alien Force on its own merits rather than constantly comparing it to the original. Hopefully this time around I'll be able to provide a better analysis. Alright, first off is some of the stuff that I actually enjoyed upon rewatching the show. I really loved the first 3 episodes of Season 2, that is, Darkstar Rising, Alone Together, and Good Copy, Bad Copy. These 3 episodes all had really engaging plots that kept me hooked throughout the entire episode run, and I felt like they were actually pretty dark, but not in the usual AF/UAF way of just being overly edgy. They actually had some dark, mature material that they handled really well. While Alone Together is already a universal fan favorite, I found Darkstar Rising also had a tinge of that stuff as well. Now yes, Darkstar is far from being a complex character in this series, even in this episode, but his motivation of wanting to feed off the 4 he captured as revenge for what Ben did to him is pretty dark and disturbing, but in an understandable way, and doesn't feel overly edgy like Ultimate Alien Force. It manages to really convey just how depraved this character has become. And while I normally scoff at the Dr. Doom comparison given to Darkstar, this time I kinda see where those people are coming from. He's manipulative, cunning, and dangerous in this episode, making him just as dangerous as a threat as Dr. Doom is normally portrayed as in his series. Moving on from Darkstar Rising, another episode that I found myself really enjoying was Alone Together. This episode was pretty great and had a lot of great things going for it, but the thing that really got me was just the great back and forth between Riley and Ben, who both clearly hate each other and are constantly making digs towards one another at first, until they become friends later on.
Water, your powers of deduction are truly staggering. Got him!
Another thing that I really liked about this episode was the ending. It was tragic in all the best ways. Seeing Riley still given to his old ways and belief, and exiling him knowing that he can never return to his people, was the perfect way to end it in my opinion. It kinda makes me wish we didn't see Riley again, as this ending is perfect closure for this character, and shows just how destructive these kinds of beliefs are. And next up on the good list, Good Copy, Bad Copy is honestly one of my favorite Ben 10 episodes, period. It manages to twist the whole evil version of the superhero trope on its head so effortlessly, and provides such a good explanation in universe for why this happened. I also felt like Ben was at his best here, and was actually using his powers to the fullest, unlike in most episodes, where for whatever reason, he just stays one alien and never changes, and then if the bad guy gets away, he's just like, oh no, he's gone, instead of switching to Jetray and catching up with him. And on top of all that, I actually managed to feel some sympathy for Albedo as well, being forever trapped as a human as punishment for his crime of nearly destroying the universe, which he only did because he was trapped as a human version of Ben after creating his own Omnitrix. It's such a great, compelling story that I really enjoyed rewatching. Alright, now let's move on to the parts of Alien Force that I still think hold it back a little bit. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm trying not to compare this show so much to classic. So with that in mind, there are really only 2 major things that I think hold this show back from being amazing. Those 2 things are character development and the main villains, the hybrid. First up, let's talk about the character development in this show. Besides Kevin's character, there really isn't much development at all for Ben and Gwen. And the reason why this bothers me is because we spend nearly 30 episodes with these characters. So to not see any overall development is kind of, well, boring, for lack of a better word. But hold on a minute, why did I say that Ben did go through a character arc in my very first video? Remember how I complained about Ben's character arc of becoming a leader not being done very well? Well, the thing about that character arc, and the thing I had forgotten when I initially recorded that video, is it's a very small character arc. You see, there's this little thread in the first 6 episodes about Ben trying to become a leader. At least that's what I think it's about. And after Grandpa Max dies, this thread is almost never brought up again.
Listen, guys. I'm sorry I took Morningstar's side over yours. And more important, that I wasn't watching your back.
It wasn't your fault. I guess Morningstar had some kind of control over me.
It was my fault. I was in such a hurry to build our team, I ignored the danger. If I'm going to be a good leader, I'm going to need to show better judgment.
This probably has something to do with the original plan for Alien Force, which was to be a series about Ben training a new set of heroes for the next generation, and it was to be called Ben 10 Hero Generation. This idea obviously didn't come to fruition, but I'm guessing this little arc Ben goes through in the first 6 episodes is a remnant of that. The reason why I point this out is because I'm not really sure what to make of this. I'm not really sure if it's fair for me to criticize a character arc that only had 6 episodes to fully develop, or if I'm even interpreting this the right way, because it might not have been a full-on character arc, but might just have been a small story thread that wasn't fully developed because the writers didn't have time for it. But whatever the case, this is really the only development Ben goes through, and whether or not you think it was done amazingly or done terribly, I think we can all agree that not having a character develop at all for 20 episodes after these first 6 isn't really the best way of going about things. And another reason I bring it up is because I hear people call Ben a flat character. The idea is that this version of Ben is flat because he's learned so much from all his adventures in the classic series. In my opinion, this is sort of a weak defense of Ben's character because 1, this show takes place 5 years later and a completely different set of circumstances that you'd think would have more of an impact on this kid who hasn't even been a hero in 5 years. But also 2, like I've been talking about for the past couple minutes now, the first 6 episodes have been having a character arc. Then after that, he stays flat for the rest of the show. So no, the writers clearly didn't intend for Ben to be flat the whole time. But even if you truly believe Ben was meant to be a flat character here, even though it clearly wasn't what the writers intended, I don't really think it matters because it makes Ben more boring. Ben is completely flat now, so he has no character arc for us to get invested into. He completely understands how to use the Omnitrix and it never glitches out on it, removing all tension from any fight scene he's in. And besides Julie, he really doesn't have much of a personal life for us to get invested into. This results in Ben being a really boring main character, especially when compared to his classic series counterpart, who was constantly having to learn a lesson every episode. Maybe if Ben wasn't the main character, I would be more forgiving, but the fact is, he is the main character. So having a boring main character, in my opinion, automatically lowers a show, because even if the rest of the plot is entertaining, the main character is just a boring nobody who's just kinda there throughout the episodes. But okay, you already know how I feel about this version of Ben. But what about this version of Kevin? Sure, he doesn't act at all like the classic series Kevin, but like I said at the beginning, I'm trying to avoid comparisons to the classic series. So, that begs the question, is this version of Kevin a good character, despite the fact that he's nothing like he was originally portrayed? Is he able to stand on his own as a character in this version of Ben 10?
Find out on the next exciting episode of Dragon Ball Z!
Nah, I'm just kidding. I'll tell you guys the answer now. Honestly, while I do think the answer is more complex than a simple yes or no, me personally, I don't think there's enough writing backing up this version of Kevin to make him a standout 3-dimensional character like his classic series counterpart was. See, even ignoring the classic series, Alien Force's first episode clearly sets him up to be a kind of dangerous low-life criminal selling illegal arms to aliens and humans alike, yet this supposed tough guy pretty much just instantly rolls over the second Gwen tells him someone could get hurt. In fact, Kevin's relationship with Gwen is honestly the worst part about this show, because it holds Kevin back from having any meaningful development. Instead of asking himself, why was I selling this illegal technology? Why was I so willing to hurt people? And is there a better way for me to make money? Or can I have a normal life like everyone else around me? He instead just asks, oh, how can I impress Gwen? Never mind the fact that this relationship holds back Gwen from ever having to develop as a character on her own, since she's just constantly used as a tool to get Kevin's attention. But on top of that, it just feels weird. Again, Kevin is a criminal. Even ignoring classic series portrayal of him, this version of the show clearly made him out to be a bad guy too. He had plenty of nefarious connections and worked with villains like Volcanus in the past, yet somehow he was willing to throw all of that away and never once look back the second Gwen tells him to. If they had just made it so Kevin was just selling some tech to get some money to leave town or something after finally coming out of the null void, or maybe rework the story a little more to have Kevin be going to a really bad high school, really poor and run down, and happen across some alien tech and decide to sell it on a whim, or maybe, he was working for a while to find some to sell, if you really want to go deeper with it, then I might have believed his change a little more. It still wouldn't have made sense at all given classic, but it would have worked for this version of the show. The problem with making him an arms dealer is that, well, he's an arms dealer. He's selling illegal weapons for a profit, weapons that can hurt people, and weapons that do hurt people. In the episode we see them in, Magister Labyrinth literally dies because one of the Forever Knights messes with the weapon and causes a huge explosion, a weapon he never would have gotten if it wasn't for Kevin. But Kevin never has to confront this reality. Instead, the show decides to focus on Gwen and him for some reason. Oh, and I already know what some of you might be thinking if you've never seen Alien Force before. But A10, this Labyrinth guy is supposed to be some sort of police officer, right? And Kevin's a crook? Maybe he just doesn't care about him because he's a criminal. Okay, valid, but A, Kevin's dad is revealed to be a cop, and B, it's eventually revealed that Kevin wants to be a cop too, and C, Alien Force seems to imply that Labyrinth's death somehow is the catalyst for him wanting to change and stop the hybrid. Again, a death he caused by selling the Forever Knights the weapons. But Kevin and Gwen's relationship is really only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to my problems with this version of Kevin. And to be fair here, the relationship does eventually get better. By the time we get to UAF and Omniverse, the relationship does feel legitimately more fleshed out, although I still think that doesn't really make up for forcing it so hard in the first 2 seasons of Alien Force. My main issue with this version of Kevin is that he doesn't go through any character development. Switching gears here for a minute, you know how every Ben 10 critic nowadays talks about how Ben doesn't go through much character development in the classic show? As the saying goes, Ben learns a lesson in one episode, then forgets it in the next, then relearns it again in another episode. This is unironically true for this version of Kevin in Alien Force. He learns at the end of Ben 10 Returns Part 2 that he needs to be a better person, then forgets that lesson. Then he has to relearn Kevin's big score. Then he forgets it again and takes money from the Forever Knights and be knighted when they ask him to bring Ben to them to help kill a dragon. And the cycle either continues throughout season 1 or just straight up stops in season 2, where Kevin really doesn't have much to do besides hang out with Gwen. The reason why this bothers me so much is because Kevin's behavior is a lot worse than what classic series Ben did. Like, sure, he could be annoying sometimes, but he was never a criminal like Kevin. But I think I've made enough of a point here. Let's move on to Gwen. So, Gwen's character development. Yeah, I really don't have much for this. I was gonna rant even more about Kevin, but we don't really need to hear that. The problem with Gwen in Alien Force is that she was literally just there. Besides Kevin and that one episode where she learned she was an Anardite, she gets almost no screen time. As for that one episode where she learned she was an Anardite and was offered a chance to be amongst her people and learn how to fulfill her destiny, so to speak, it was alright. My problem with it is that once again Kevin and Gwen are in the focus and she chooses not to go gain ultimate power because Kevin doesn't want her to. To be fair here, she didn't seem that interested in the offer, but it still feels strange at all that this is the reason why she chooses not to take it. Other than that, my problems with the episode lie more with the problems / retcons it made to the classic series. But like I said, I am trying to avoid that in this video, so I'm just gonna skip that stuff for now. So now on to the more important part of the video in my opinion, the hybrid, and why they're just not very good villains. What makes them such bad villains? Well, I'm glad you asked. First, let's talk about their motivation. The Hybrid literally just want to destroy every inhabited planet in the known galaxy. It's a comically over-the-top evil scheme. Like sure, Ben 10 has had villains that want to take over the Earth, and even some that wanted to destroy it, but they all had much better motivations than the Hybrid, who just want to destroy the entire universe because they're dying out, as if that's gonna help them at all. This leads me to my two big problems with the Hybrid. The first one is more of a personal problem. See, when I sat down to rewatch Ben 10 Alien Force and saw the first episode, I thought, oh, this show's getting a little darker. Maybe this time the villains will be more complex, have more interesting motivations than just wanting to take over the Earth. But as I just finished explaining, they really don't. But okay, that was on me. Most Ben 10 shows and most superhero shows in general just boil down to the villains wanting to either take over or destroy the universe. Fine, I guess that's okay. But what's not okay in my opinion is just how little characterization the Hybrid really get. Like I said earlier, we only learned the Hybrid's motivation in the final episode of Season 2. So for about 26 episodes, we were just left in the dark about their motivations. And the only real characterization we were ever given was that they were racist. And not just a couple of them, all of them. But we never learned why until that final episode. So for 26 episodes, we just don't understand their motivation or why they are the way they are. I already talked about how this makes them seem comically over-the-top evil with the likes of Dr. Animo from the classic show, but another thing this does is prevent us from ever really feeling any fear or tension from them. Compare Vilgax to the Hybrid and you'll see what I'm talking about. Sure, on paper they seem to have equally one-dimensional motivations of wanting to rule the world, but it's their characterization that really separates them. Vilgax is characterized as a cunning, deceitful, and dangerous criminal warlord who will stop at nothing in his quest to get the Omnitrix. His character doesn't need a whole army to be threatening. He alone is scary because of this motivation. Because the writers spent more time characterizing Vilgax instead of just giving him an army and a generic motivation like the Alien Force writers did for the Hybrid, we the audience are able to truly understand just how dangerous and twisted this villain is. None of the Hybrid ever really get this level of characterization, so in turn, they're never really as scary as someone like Vilgax or even Dr. Animo from the classic series, which is only further compounded by the fact that their story arc is stretched so far. Remember, these guys aren't just one-off villains, they're the main baddies for 26 episodes. Imagine if Animo was the main villain for 26 episodes of a Ben 10 series. Yeah, that's basically what we get with the Hybrid, and it's just as bad as it sounds. I normally don't try and suggest things that I think could have made the story better, just because I feel like it sounds a little arrogant, like I think I know better than the writers of the series. But one small change that I think could have helped this series a lot was only having one Hybrid commander be on Earth, one villain who we follow throughout the season, who is characterized as an arrogant, vain, and cruel Hybrid who only cares about himself and his race and no one else, whose beliefs could be challenged similar to Rainy in the episode Alone Together, or who simply stays flat, believing that he is right and that the others are the ones who are crazy and inferior and wrong. And at the end of Season 2, he realizes that he can no longer compete with Ben, Kevin, and Gwen because they've simply become too powerful and destroyed too many of his outposts. So he calls in the rest of the Hybrid for backup, and they go to war with all of planet Earth. I know, it's a pretty generic suggestion that's been passed around a lot in the fandom recently, but it's one that I think could really help this show's main villains be better characterized than what we got. But yeah, that about wraps it up, guys. This video is getting a little too long, and while I do have more to say, most of it is just comparisons to the classic again, and I wanted to avoid a lot of that in this video, so that's about it. See you in the next video.